Welcome to the Australian Business Executive Podcast, where we speak with many of Australia's most influential personalities on issues of business and economic development taking place across the country. You can stay up to date with our magazines, videos and podcasts by visiting www.theabe.tv and clicking on subscribe.
This podcast is brought to you by Data Action Financial Services and CGU Insurance for Your Business. Today's guest is Jon Linehan. Jon has been the MD and CEO for Defence Bank for more than 10 years. His prior career experience includes CEO positions with AustSafe Super and Host Plus, in addition to senior leadership roles with organisations including Australian Unit Funds Management. Jon, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you very much, Stuart, for having me.
My pleasure. Jon, firstly, for our listeners today, would you mind giving an overview of Defence Bank and its position in the market?
Sure, Stuart. Defence Bank is a cooperative bank. As the name implies, we're mainly in the defence communities. We're the 10th largest mutual bank in the country. We've got about 40 branches, mainly on Defence Force bases. In terms of ourselves, we've got assets of around about $2 billion and we grow rapidly and have been for the past 10 years.
With a customer base heavily focused in the defence sector, how do you deal with servicing this clientele when they're in rural and regional areas or when they're deployed overseas?
Well, that's one of our challenges. Our demographic is about 10 years younger, and you can imagine that most people in the Australian Defence Forces are generally younger than the population. They're highly technologically literate because essentially they're dealing with equipment. And if you think about ships or planes or armies areas, the technology they use is quite advanced. And further to that, then they're spread geographically, and most defence personnel aren't based in the middle of capital cities. They're spread out in bases which are often in very remote areas. And of course, in the current times, many of our members are deployed overseas with the ADF. So our challenge is to be in contact with them and to service their needs. And so we focus heavily on technology. And to that end, we are very careful to make certain that most of our members who deal with us increasingly on mobile technologies and then in terms of computers, that they're serviced in a way with the most advanced technology. So we'll release things like Apple Pay, which three of the larger banks haven't released in Australia yet early. We're the first bank in Australia to launch video technology, so you can talk to us on your phone via a video app. And so we keep in front of that technology curve to service our members, which are spread everywhere, both globally and nationally.
When the publication recently ran Defence Bank's editorial profile, you discussed the investment the company makes in your staff and the difference this makes. Could you discuss that in a little more detail? Certainly,
Stuart. Look, staff are important to us. They drive our organisation. Our staff are spread, as I flagged with you a minute ago, across 40 branches which have a footprint. 2/3 of our staff are engaged at customer interface. We spend a lot of time training staff. We have quite a sophisticated system of online training, which all staff are involved in. We then obviously run extensive training programs. At one point, about 2 years ago, 50% of our staff were in diploma courses. Essentially, what we are endeavouring to do as we grow is to keep staff, because we want to keep those staff that have a high commitment to the organisation and appreciate the values of the organisation. But as we automate areas and as we've quadrupled in size, our staff numbers have come down in the order of 20%, and largely through natural attrition. And what we've done in that is retrain staff, move them to more interesting jobs as we've automated more mundane jobs, and we're always skilling our staff up. So we focus heavily on those sorts of needs. And we see that in our staff engagement, which is currently around 82%, which is measured independently, which is exceptionally high, even though we go through a lot of technology change.
Defence Bank has a very high net promoter score. Can you explain what this means in practice and why it's held in such high regard?
Certainly. Our Net Promoter Score is 24. Most of the majors are tracking somewhere around about -15 to -17. Essentially, we are a bank that is member-owned, but more importantly, a bank that focuses heavily on two things. One is ethics and one is economics. I always say to people like working for an organisation that is dynamic, but also one that has a deep moral compass in terms of ethics. So in terms of our membership, we look at what services them first. So, for example, our call centres deliberately aren't timed because we want to engage in the conversation with their members to their needs. They're locally based. And more importantly, we see the member, who are also our owners, as the most important person in the room. So in our case, very common for us to receive, often our branches receive flowers from people. Thanks. More recently in the Senate debate on banks, there was a lot of letters to various papers. I included, say, the Melbourne Age in that. And I was looking down a column, and the first three letters were attacking the major banks. And then one of our members wrote in from Tasmania and noted that he loved his bank and he couldn't understand why other people didn't, because we'd always behaved ethically. So we always have a deep code of conduct. Our staff vote on the code of conduct, which they voted for 2 years ago. Everyone is responsible and measured on behaving ethically. And in terms of that, we see that reflected throughout membership. And we're very close to the ADF because many of our staff are spouses of the ADF on basis, and they live in communities, and those communities are very focused in a very strong way towards the Defence Forces. But of course, our members in a broader sense outside of that as well. We receive virtually no complaints, but if we do receive the very few complaints we ever get any time, they're escalated to myself or to one of our senior executive managers, and they're dealt with.
Some years ago, there was a decision made to rebrand as Defence Bank from Defence Credit Union. What was the marketing and communication thought process in undertaking this?
Look, Defence Force Credit Union, as we then were, was a smaller organisation. It did have a high level of trust, and I often say that banks only sell one thing, that is trust. The opportunity arose in 2012 with federal government changes in terms of their regulatory framework for us to become a bank. So we became Defence Bank. We went out to our members, because these things are determined by vote. We had a 97% vote in favour of it. We found that generally younger people, and most of our demographic is quite young, didn't really understand what a credit union was anymore. It was very much seen as a term of the 1970s. They understood what a bank is, what it did, and of course Defence Bank indicated our clear focus on defence. We weren't seeking to move from defence. And it was one of those odd occasions. If I give you an example, I was at a branch and I was talking to our staff in Enoggera, which is northern part of Brisbane, a very large army base. And as I was talking to the staff out in the back area, and they were still serving at the front area, one of our staff walked out from where we were talking and walked into the main branch, and it was obviously fairly crowded, and said to everyone, "Oh, we think you've changed our name to Defence Bank." And they're all army personnel at that area, and they all started clapping.
Good sign.
It was quite a strange story, and our staff loved the name change. The members loved it. They made it clear what we do, and look, ever since then, it's just refocused the organisation on what we do. But we're very clear in this. We're not moving away from our values, but we're just making a clear statement of who we are.
Now, final question for you today, John, is you've been sitting on board since your 20s and as a CEO since your late 30s. What are some of the best traits you've identified in some senior managers you've crossed paths with?
Well, I think good senior managers, in my view, have the 3 L's. One is leadership, and one is listening, and one is learning. Leadership is not having authority. Authority comes with a title. Leadership is having a clear sense of vision, a clear sense of getting people behind you in that journey. But listening is very important, and I think that too few people actually listen. When I have a management meeting, which I do once a week, I'm the last person to talk at all times, because when I ask their views, I want to actually have people's views. I don't want people telling me what I know. I often say to people, I know what I know, but I don't know what you know, so tell me, because I'm trying to understand them. The last thing, of course, is learning. And because society moves so fast, we have to try things. We have to take risks, and part of my job as CEO and the board's job as overseeing the organisation is to allocate capital and risk. But if you make 20 decisions and you get 2 wrong, your score is not -2, it's +18. And so we learn, we adapt, and we go forward. So I'm very firmly of the mind that you don't have to lead by pushing authority. So once again, I just simply say it's really about leadership, listening and learning.
Thank you for that, Jon. That's all I have for you today. Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule for us.
Oh, look, I appreciate it, and thanks for the interviews.
This has been a production of the Australian Business Executive, a division of Romulus Rising Proprietary Limited. All rights reserved. You can stay up to date with the Australian Business Executive and our magazines, videos and podcasts by visiting www.theabe.tv and clicking on subscribe.